Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Keandra Jones, President of the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce, and thank you very much for joining us. This is our Transportation and Mobility Committee meeting. I want to thank each one of you for joining us. We also have on the line our chair, Steve Camp. Steve, would you like to have a few words?
Just thanks to everyone for coming out and supporting the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce. We truly appreciate it. These are trying times, and together we're all going to get through this as a community. Thank you, Keandra.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Now, I'm going to get ready to turn things over to our chair, our committee chair. But before I do, just a couple of things. We are going to have a guest speaker. And as he's speaking, we would ask that each of you continue to have your devices on mute, as we all sometimes have some background noise and we don't want that to be a distraction. Also, as the presentation is being given, if you have any questions, you are welcome to put it in the chat box, and those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm turning things over to our chair, Adrienne Williams. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keandra. Good morning, everyone. As she mentioned, I'm Adrienne Williams, Chair for the Oak Cliff Chamber's Transportation and Mobility Committee. We were talking with our guest speaker a little earlier this morning. So the committee itself is about 10 years old, give or take. We've had the Transportation and Mobility Committee. I saw Colette on the line, so we definitely have some of our members, but I'm assuming we may have some guests as well. So with that, we definitely want to welcome others who may be interested in joining the Transportation and Mobility Committee. Traditionally, we meet on fourth Thursdays of each month. And so we'll have our guest speaker today, but for next month, May 28th, we will have a planning meeting for our annual conference or transportation breakfast that's normally held in November. And so this year, assuming things tentative, depending, of course, where we are with COVID, but we are planning for our annual transportation breakfast for November 12th. So again, that planning kind of work session will happen on May 28th for those who are interested in joining us for conference planning and just maybe joining the committee itself. We'd love to have you. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to our Vice Chair, Matt Craig, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Adrian, and good morning, everyone. Glad y'all could join us here virtually. And again, I really want to thank Tom Bamonte for with the North Central Texas Council of Governments to give us a little presentation on basically looking at the future of transportation in the COVID present. Now, Tom, if you don't know Tom, he's been with the Council of Government for the last 4 years. That's the NCT COG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. But before that, Tom was with the NTTA, and then came to us through Chicago, before that with Illinois Tollway and Chicago Transit. Graduate of the University of Chicago and the Northwestern University School of Law. So, you know, he's one of the smart guys. So, you know, with that, having that law background is definitely a good thing to have when it comes to the automated vehicle world as well. So, you know, if those credentials aren't enough, Tom is a resident of North Oak Cliff. So, man, that gives him real street cred. So with that, Tom, if you would, go ahead and start your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Let me share my screen and get going. I've been to many conferences in the automated vehicle field, and inevitably the PowerPoints crash. You have world famous scientists and researchers, and it keeps us all very humble in the field. I originally was going to start with, you know, do an overview of lots of whiz bang, you know, flying cars and delivery robots. But I think COVID has caused us to want to focus on issues that may be closer to home and focusing more on how we think about transportation. So I want to give you a little overview of the impact of COVID on our transportation system, and then give you kind of a peek under the tent or into the tent of the transportation planning process. and then close with 4 or 5 kind of ideas that you and your committee and your chamber may want to wrestle with in the months and years ahead. I welcome questions at any time. And if Matt said, you know, if I'm supposedly the smart guy by credentials, I do think the biggest credential is being a member or near member, because we were debating whether I actually live in Oak Cliff, but I certainly shop and recreate, and I really, really value being part of this community. So the effects of COVID, I'm showing you a few slides that we presented to our technical committee last week. Traffic is down roughly a bit more than a third. This is on the freeways, pretty much the same throughout all of the region. Traffic jams have gone away. You can see in the lower line, those are traffic speeds. Typically morning rush, evening rush, speeds go down. Now it's pretty much flat all the day. So we've magically cured congestion, at least from the normal everyday incidents. I should say that people are taking advantage of the open roads. They're driving too fast. Actually seeing an increase in fatal accidents. So while total crashes are down, the seriousness of crashes are increasing. And hammered hard. It is down roughly the same as the highway side on all of its features. With one exception, GoLink is their kind of ban for everyone. They have seen an uptick there. Here's an interesting one, and this is probably one of the things that you have seen in your own communities. A big increase in bike pedestrian traffic. I've certainly noticed it as I've been out in the neighborhood. You probably have as well. But as traffic calms, pedestrians and bicyclists emerge. And I'm struck by seeing families on bikes on streets. I've never seen them before. Perhaps your experience has been similar. Same with pedestrians, more people out and strolling. I'm a runner, and one of my routes is along the Trinity on the levees. I'm seeing many, many more people out and about, same in walking in the neighborhoods. Okay. Any questions at this point? I'm waiting. I told you I would face technical challenges, and right now my PowerPoint's not advancing. Hopefully we'll try it again. There it goes. Air quality. This shows one of the chemicals in our air from transportation, nitrous oxide, and you can just see visually from February to the end of March, a significant reduction in air pollution from transportation. Transportation, as you may know, accounts for almost a third of CO2 and other emissions. And when it's concentrated in corridors like 35 and 67 or major arterials, there are major adverse health implications. And I think we've probably all noticed clear air. It's hard to sometimes recognize the skyline. It's so clear from across the Trinity. Another big change, clear air, more bikes and pedestrians, less traffic. We've probably all been using delivery more, Amazon and others, and that has been a major change. And in my world, I'm seeing a lot of work on delivery robots, providing last mile deliveries. We had a deployment at UTD before COVID hit of little sidewalk delivery robots. I anticipate another one coming soon in one of our suburbs. And I think if on the automated vehicle front, last mile delivery robots, think of cute little boxes on wheels going from local stores to on the sidewalks to home deliveries. I think we're going to see very possibly an explosion of those kinds of services. So now I want to share with you a little bit about the planning process. And, maybe this is old news. I'm told you engage my boss on a regular basis. That's cool. I know city staff, colleagues in the city and in my organization work with you. But just a reminder that transportation policy in the region is set by 44 people. I got a list here. You see their heavy representation from cities, counties, and transportation agencies. So our job, as we're what's known as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, we plan and program all of the projects that get federal funding. So if you're not on our plan, it doesn't get built with federal money. And these are the people who set the policies and endorse the plans. So one of our major plans is what we call our long-range plan. And this is where we calculate how much of your money we have to spend in the region on transportation. And this is where we allocate, we prioritize. This is our long-range plan with dollars behind it. And this is the plan that gets endorsed by the policy body. The last time they did so was in 2018, and they adopted it unanimously with little discussion. So you'll see that in our region, we prioritize, we put roughly 1/3 into maintaining our system and 2/3 into building new stuff. It's very interesting. Atlanta just came out with their 2050 plan, and that I've heard that their business community has weighed in very heavily, and Atlanta has the exact reverse in priorities, where it is spending 2/3 of its resources to maintain and optimize its existing system and 1/3 to build new stuff. We have a 1/3 on the existing system and 2/3 on building new things. So the question I would pose to the committee and the chamber as a whole is this kind of balance between maintaining and optimizing the existing system versus building new things, how does that affect Oak Cliff and its transportation and economics? So that's kind of an existential question for you. And we're starting to gear up on our next plan. And in Atlanta, the business community became very active in its 2050 plan. Now there's opportunity. We value public comment and get all public comments to RTC members. So there are ways through that mechanism, through engagement with your elected officials who sit on the RTC, to make any changes to our priorities. And we certainly encourage community involvement of that sort. So what drives what we do? So I showed you those numbers, I showed you those priorities. You might think that there's sophisticated cost-benefit analyses and those kind of things, but it really, I've spent 4 years asking my colleagues, well, how do we decide what we spend the money on? And how do we decide how much goes into those buckets of money? And the answer really is staff has a gut feel for what the elected officials on the RTC want. And they put together a plan. And thus far, they've been very successful in earning the support of the RTC. The science, if you will, behind it is our focus is overwhelmingly on congestion. That's delay in travel. So what we do is we look at roadways, we say, how are they performing at peak? Oh, they're crowded. They get a D or an F. We need to expand them. And then it's something we've been doing for 35 years or more. We do these blob maps. So there in the lower left is here's a congestion today. And then we do this exercise. We say, well, DFW is going to grow in population. if we don't do anything, we'll get this huge, horrible blob of congestion. That's the no build in the center. And then we say, well, if we build a lot of new stuff, we're going to have congestion that is better than the no build alternative, but it's going to be worse than today. So I ask you, you're a chamber of commerce. Many of you do business plans, report the board of directors. What we're doing as a region is, according to our primary measure of success, our long-range plan is delivering a transportation product that performs worse than the system does today. So imagine going to your board of directors and say, board, our business plan is to deliver a product that's not as good as the one we're delivering today. That's what I think I would know what the reaction of your board would be. They would say, go back to the drawing board. We haven't gotten that direction as staff to go back to the drawing board. Again, I think the elected officials in the RTC say transportation is one of many things. We do what we can. But I just wanted you to be aware that according to our own primary measure, our transportation system is not going to function as well in the future as it does today. So let's go beyond congestion, and I want to show, this shows where we are putting our investments in the future. On the left shows where we're doing a lot of arterials, and you'll see that the way we're managing congestion is to spread out the region, because if you have lower density of people and vehicles, your highways are likely to have less congestion. So we're managing congestion by continuing to grow outward. And on the rail side, we are managing congestion by building rail into the outlying parts of the region for the most part, as opposed to concentrating our rail investment in existing areas of high density. So again, I throw that out to the committee to think about: are those investment priorities serving the needs of existing built-out communities like Oak Cliff? And now we get into kind of how COVID and how the planning profession is starting to change. There's been in recent years a real re-examination of congestion as the measure of success and failure in transportation. INREX does one of the global scorecards of congestion, and its own assessment is that congestion is actually often a good thing. It's an indication of economic activity. It's an indication of destinations clustering. It's where people want to go. And I think, and then on the right, you can see as DFW approaches 10 million people, which is global city status, by chasing down low congestion, is our model, the Omaha, the Toledos, the Stocktons, do we want to be big versions of that? Or do we want to think about how we compete more directly with global centers that, by the way, happen to have relatively high levels of congestion? So in the planning profession, there's a real questioning of congestion as being the best measure of success or failure. And I think in your own experience, someone in our conversation before we got started saying, traffic's a real problem in Bishop Arts. Well, that's a place where people want to go. And so maybe we have to rethink how we approach congestion and what we're measuring. So what are people looking at? They're looking at a concept called accessibility. they're saying, what is transportation trying to do? And it really is connecting us to all sorts of destinations. And so now that we have more sophisticated tools to measure and do computing, we can analyze, are we connecting people to destinations? And here's one study that from the Brookings Institution that suggests that at a time in the early 2000s when we were building and expanding our metropolitan footprint, we were actually in the process putting destinations farther away from people. And so again, I asked yourself as Oak Cliff, in terms of putting your people, giving them access to destinations, this may be a one that as destinations get farther away from your residents, from your potential customers, there's, accessibility becomes a real important measure. There have been folks who have measured accessibility for folks who don't have access to a vehicle, because Dallas scores very well in terms of giving people access to destinations with a vehicle. But for those who bike, who walk, who rely on transit, we score much less well against competitor cities. And this is just an example of one of those comparisons, is for low-income people trying to get their foot, get on the economic ladder up to more success. Our transportation system is a difficult barrier for them. And I certainly noticed as I've run through Oak Cliff in more modest income areas, the amount of vehicles it takes for relatively low income people to reach their destinations is really striking. And I think, when you see 3 or 4 cars in a household, if even one of those cars could be repurposed, and that could pay tuition, healthcare, and all sorts of things. So there's a real opportunity cost when we require people to have a car to be full-fledged members of our economy. Another measure that we don't look at currently, again, because we're focused on vehicle flow and congestion, is affordability. And here, DFW, when you look at transportation as a percentage of median income, we're somewhat high compared to competitor cities. And this is just the bottom line impact of transportation coming out of family budgets. Another measure that we certainly look at safety and crashes, and Texas cities are quite high compared to other US cities and certainly other developed countries in terms of crash. But we spend so much time on congestion, but the cost of crashes in DFW dwarfs the cost of congestion. So we're in this weird situation where we design our streets and the highways to maximize speed, to maximize vehicle throughput, even though that designing for high speeds, lots of lanes, few intersections, those actually help contribute to a design environment that results in high levels of crashes and especially high levels of pedestrian crashes. And so again, you are business people, but you would think in doing kind of cost benefit, the cost versus benefit, that somehow we would take into effect how street design affect the cost of crashes, and how can we design so that we're minimizing the cost of crashes, or we're minimizing the sum of congestion costs and crash costs. So I think there's a real opportunity here to think about street design. By building streets more safely, we're actually perhaps saving more money than if we build them to maximize vehicle flow and speeds as we currently do. Fiscal sustainability. Again, you're a business-oriented thing. My guess is that when you make investments in new capital assets, you think about what it will take to maintain those assets. The fact is that we do not do life cycle cost analysis when we make our transportation investments. We look at the capital cost, we look at the expected savings from speeding vehicle flow, and if it's a net positive, it's a go. But what that means is we're putting out a lot of infrastructure that requires maintenance, upkeep, rehabilitation, and ultimately rebuilding. And in many cases, the tax base is insufficient to pay for those assets. We don't look at that currently. And what that results is, here on the left is from the city of Dallas. Last fall, they did an analysis of how much money do they have for street maintenance and how much money would it take to keep the streets at current condition. And they concluded that the next decade, they're going to be roughly $200 million short each year of the money necessary just to keep street conditions as they are. So we've got a situation in Dallas. The picture on the upper right is one I took in Irving, right next to a middle school and apartment complex with a bunch of kids. You know, Irving's a home of Fortune 500 companies, but apparently it lacks the resources to maintain its street infrastructure. That is a pattern throughout the region where we're putting out infrastructure without having the resources to maintain them. So again, we're focused on congestion, maximizing vehicle flow. An alternative or a supplement to that might be making sure that we have the resources to maintain the stuff that we're building. Public health, just briefly, we're not currently, we're certainly tracking emissions. We've made some great progress in reducing ozone factors. On the CO2 front, we're putting out more CO2 than we did before, but we don't really account for the public health implications of the transportation investments that we're making. So for example, there have been some preliminary studies that showed that in areas where there's high levels of airborne particulates, many of those come from the transportation sector, there was a real direct relationship between COVID death rate and airborne pollutants. We don't factor, when we build a highway corridor or expand a highway corridor, we don't currently factor into our investment decision-making what will be the public health consequences or costs associated with higher levels of air pollution. So again, this is something that as we think as planners, should we be factoring in things like this in the decision-making of our investments? Finally, short hauls. 20% of our vehicle trips currently are 1 mile or less, perfect for walking. Over half of our current vehicle trips are 4 miles or less. Are there ways to get more of these trips through walking, biking, maybe new vehicle types, EV bikes, little, in my world, automated pods, you name it. And what that can lead is to, less reliance on big streets, big vehicles that require lots of land for storage. If we can, in areas especially like Oak Cliff that are relatively dense, can we build an environment that we can we can get more of our trips done through, I would just say, lighter or more sustainable means. And these ways are also cheaper. So I was on a call yesterday with a former senior member of US DOT, and she said, I graduated from college. The only jobs required me to have a car, but I couldn't get a car until I had a job. And she was just illustrating the barrier of having to have a car for people to get, get started economically. If we have ways to walk and bike and transit to work, to education, etc., that's a major way to, again, provide economic benefits for a region. So currently, our investment focus is on facilitating long trips, the expressways, the tollways, the major arterials. Planners are now asking, after 50 plus, kind of coming to give a similar focus on what I call the capillaries of the transportation system, the short trips, the alternative means like bike and walking, and now teleworking, thinking of that as a mode of transportation. Maybe we need to focus our energy and resources on the little stuff, the short stuff, the quality of sidewalks. I call it the grandma and the skateboarding's test. Make your travel environment so that skateboarders and grandmas can accommodate them. That will facilitate the kind of access, walking, biking, healthy ways of moving around that we're seeing now in this COVID environment. So platforms for opportunities. I walk and run around Oak Cliff and other parts of Dallas. We have a ton of space devoted to our streets. They're wide, they're fast, and outside of a couple hours each day, in some cases, they're often empty. And I think these are real opportunities for economic development and a proliferation of transportation options for people. So let me finish with just some ideas that, again, come from the planning perspective. I want to throw it into the arms of the committee to think about as ways to leverage this great asset that Oak Cliff and other parts of Dallas have, all of this expanse of street space. So from a regional basis, maybe something that would resonate with you as coming from the business community is maybe as a region, we need to have the discipline that we keep up our system, our existing system, and before we fund new stuff. So just as you don't build an addition to your house if your roof is leaking and you don't have resources to repair, maybe we don't invest so aggressively in new stuff until we can take care of our existing transportation system. A related vein is to maybe think about, do we need to ask that there be a maintenance budget in place before we add to our inventory of transportation infrastructure? Now, on the transit side, transit agencies, before they build new rail lines, have to show to the FTA that they have budget resources to maintain that assets. We don't ask that on the highway side. We can put out highways and streets, and again, without consideration of whether we have enough resources to maintain them. Maybe we need the discipline as a region and ultimately as a nation on the highway side. Measure success. Maybe we need to task myself and my colleagues at staff level, and maybe as a region, we need to think about switching from vehicle flow as the measure of transportation system success to, is our transportation system connecting people to more destinations at an affordable price? And look at connecting people to destinations as the way, as a measure of success. And so we would look at, is the average person getting access to more or fewer destinations over time? And we look at by mode and by community, and we'd say, let's look at Oak Cliff. And if we're adding arterials, 40 miles away, is that improving access of Oak Cliffers to jobs and opportunities? Or might there be other investments that actually increase the number of destinations accessible to folks in Oak Cliff, both via car, but also via other means? So that would be kind of the regional approach. Again, these are just ideas that I'm bringing to you coming from the planning process. Another thing is locals. I think we've thought so long of our streets as channels for vehicles. And we've said a good street is wide and fast. But just in flood control, they had this thought a half century ago where they channelized rivers to speed the flow during floods. And they found out that just caused more flooding downstream. And now they're restoring floodplains. You can think of traffic as kind of the same way, is that making streets a place where they become part of the kind of a platform for economic activities. So you see places turning parking spaces into parklets, where there's outdoor dining, or where a storefront can actually have some outdoor space to sell and display merchandise. You can, close down streets on Sundays so people can walk and stroll and access businesses in new ways. There's lots of work going on in how can we make streets accommodate bikes, pedestrians, and leave delivery robots, rather than just be a one-size-fits-all, again, facilitate vehicle flow. In a related vein, think about commercial districts. We've used transportation, we focused on vehicle flow, but don't we want our commercial districts to be sticky? Don't we want them to be destinations that attract and keep people, as opposed to prioritizing big wide streets that frankly cause people to flow through your region onto other destinations, as opposed to being attractive places where, again, people want to stop, they want to shop, they want to have recreation, they want to live, they want to put their businesses. Parking. A lot of work is being done in the planning field on parking. And I think there's kind of a near consensus that parking, when we devote a lot of land to parking, that's not land that's generating a lot of sales tax revenue. It puts destinations further apart from walking and biking. It has heat island effects, and that many cities, and even I think one state, they're working on ending the required parking minimums for businesses as a way to encourage business formation, as a way to encourage residential development that is more affordable. They're letting the developers make a market judgment of how much parking is needed, as opposed to having the state mandate parking minimums. And I know parking is a hard one. There's this received notion that lots of free marking encourages commerce. There's a lot of research, and while there are outliers on both sides, I think there's a lot of evidence that a mixed walkable environment where you have parking is available, but it's often priced so that people are encouraged to turn over the parking as opposed to park all day in a free spot in front of a business, actually encourages economic activity. Kind of mentioned this before, design for the vulnerable user. When you design spaces for grandma and for skateboards, you tend to get environments that are, again, sticky destinations where people want to go, they want to be, they want to spend money, they want to live, they want to form businesses. And there's a lot of research that when you combine density and walkability, those are the neighborhoods that generate the highest return on investment. They have rent premiums, people want to live there, and Oak Cliff, in the studies that I've seen that have been done, Oak Cliff has areas existing and certainly potential areas that could coalesce into the kind of dense, walkable centers that will be and are the center of the economy in the 21st century. So, and these all, I don't want to minimize, these all have political challenges and whatnot, but I'm just kind of sharing with you issues that may be of interest for consideration in your committee. If you're not aware, I bet you are, but I want to stress that DART is in the process of revamping its bus network. And that through a Jarrett Walker and Associates, a very well-known firm that helped redesign Houston's bus system successfully and the bus systems elsewhere. It really is going to be, there's going to be some very existential discussions about what do we want our public transit system to do. Frequent, convenient service on a few major arterials, or lots of coverage but very spotty service. So I hope that there's a survey out now, there's a series of webinars, and I really want to encourage the committee to throw itself into the effort and provide its input as DART remakes its bus system. So I'll close with some resources. I've given you links to our policy body, that's the Regional Transportation Committee, our technical committee, our long-range plans, my department. We have a data portal, link to the bus redesign, sign up for our transportation department updates. I'm happy, as you're probably all too tired of me already, but I'm certainly happy to engage any of you offline if you have any questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt and the good folks at the chamber.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it very much. And we have some questions for you here too. So don't run away. Don't walk off.
Great.
All right. So the first question from Mike here asks that, do you think that the assumptions and the models used to make transportation policy decisions will still be valid going forward, given that there will likely be behavioral changes in travel due to COVID?
Great question. I think there will be changes. I think transit, I think folks are, for some period of time, they will be wary of shared transportation. So it's public transit, Uber and Lyft. I think micromobility, like scooters and whatnot, could see a resurgence where people like the freedom of travel and you know, on their own. But you know, we humans are, you know, we've been around for a while. I think there'll be some change in behavior, but you know, now I suspect that you know, the models will continue to work. But what we do have is we have lots of new tools to understand travel behavior that we didn't have even 10 years ago, and that's because of the smartphone. And I really think the pressure is on my colleagues and others in transportation planning to take advantage of those tools to understand very quickly how change will happen.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Tom. Second question here from Marcel, and I appreciate your comments regarding the correlation between roadway design to accommodate higher speeds, which contribute more costly and deadly accidents and damage. Streets can be designed to encourage lower speeds, but as you noted, the priority is throughput. Even the statutory calculation for determining appropriate speed limit is based on how fast people drive when not otherwise controlled by a posted speed limit or sign. And how do you think that, I guess in that question, how could, in the planning process, address that balance?
Well, I think today it is folks like you who go to the policymakers and say, with all due respect, to your interest in having vehicles whiz through our neighborhoods, that's not acceptable to us. We've lost, 10 pedestrians in the last year. We've got school kids crossing, and we don't have adequate medians there, to protect them as they cross. We have, 6-lane arterials and we have retail on both sides where people are trying to cross. We are willing, and we demand that we adjust the way we design streets so people can access destinations safely. And yeah, will vehicles passing the neighborhoods move a little more slowly? That's something we're willing to accept. But it will come. Planners have been saying this for many years, but to get traction, it requires the consumer, namely you folks, to make your voice heard.
Yeah, understood. That's, I guess, with the new Metropolitan Transportation Plan update, that there'll be opportunities for the public to voice their opinion. And I'm glad you brought up about the DART bus study. Was able to participate in that as well. So there's great opportunity for those on this call to voice their opinion. Now is a good time to get involved in that. And those are some tough questions and tough challenges you bring up, Tom, on just how do we balance these decisions. And as we're, what we're seeing now as well, you brought up about the balance between maintenance and new infrastructure, that there's many of the roads, and we definitely see it in Oak Cliff, that, some of the infrastructure is 100 years old or more. And that you have that challenge of building in, when you're going to reconstruct a roadway, take that opportunity to make those safety improvements, bring things up to current standard, but yet there's that challenge of the overall need of a bigger area too. So
it is a balance, but I think if, again, I don't want to say don't quote me, you can quote me, but we have our planning and our investment is so focused on the maintaining the expressways and whatnot. And we've done some work. We found that the expressways and the TxDOT maintained arterials, they are 10% or less are in poor condition. But the city maintained roadways, 70-some% are in poor condition. And so I think the answer, when there's pushback from the region saying, well, Oak Cliff, we don't like how you're slowing down speeds on Westmoreland or Hampton to accommodate commercial activity and safe streets. The pushback is, well, you haven't been investing in us, so we have to take matters in our own hands. And you mentioned the cost, Matt. There may be opportunities to, frankly, in some streets, take a lane out of service and use that space to accommodate us, bike, pedestrian, robots, scooters, but also extend, the commercial footprint to make attractive retail environments.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Tom, into our next question here. And it's from Lori. Do you think that COVID-19 is changing political will to transition to complete streets to reduce traffic and increase walkability?
The jury's out, but I think this is an opportunity that if you find in your community that folks like the ability for family bike rides and walking, and they see that is something that should be preserved, now's the time to articulate that. I see a lot of happy faces and less noise and clear skies, and I do think that people can say, well, why can't we have this as we go back to normal? But I got to say, the short-term challenge is this. You may read the headlines. The Congress has rallied to save many companies, large and small, from bankruptcy, but it's telling state and local governments to go bankrupt instead of providing support. And as a result of the lack of resources, COVID is forcing Dallas and cities across the country to lay off people, pull back on infrastructure, repair work and whatnot. And that is the kind of thing you lose a year or 2 or 3 of maintenance and upkeep and people. You get farther and farther behind. And I think that's the immediate challenge is how can we get the state and local governments the same kind of federal support that other sectors of the economy have gotten?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question there. I think we're getting close to end, but I want to ask another question from Marcel. And sir, understanding that the federal funds could only be used for new construction, not maintenance. When you talk about the shift to maintenance, are you meaning major reconstruction or rehab of existing roadways?
I've gone down this, like I say, I'm a recovering lawyer. I took law and literature, not law and accounting. So this is tough stuff with me. I'm not an engineer, not a planner. So I've been kind of self-teaching. But on this, my next step is to put on my legal hat again and understand what flexibility there is in terms of funding. But I'm told by colleagues there's substantial flexibility in how regions allocate their funding and spend it. There are certainly restrictions in Texas state law where certain funding streams must be spent on highways and cannot be used for things like transit or high-speed rail. We'll put those things aside. But at the federal level, there has been over decades a movement to allow more flexibility and recognize that things other than high-speed auto travel deserve investment and support. Because, after all, why is a 500-yard walk to a store less valuable from a transportation perspective than a 5-mile auto trip? Why shouldn't each of those receive, equivalent levels of support? So I think we do have the flexibility, but what we don't have is from the policy board, we don't have the direction to explore alternatives. And as you see with Atlanta, where Atlanta has flipped our ratio, they're spending 2/3 on maintenance, 1/3 on capital. There is substantial flexibility for change.
Well, thank you, Tom. And really a shout out to the Council of Governments in that whole funding and balancing and going through this process. And you brought up a lot of the challenges that we as a region, balancing between Dallas, Fort Worth, inner city, the inner suburbs, and then the outer ring suburbs, all kind of competing in shouldn't say competing, but that challenge of overall funding. So with that, then I just have one quick last comment for you, Tom, before we wrap up on that. And as I was talking to a colleague at UTA, and you being the automated vehicle person, that they had a student paper on automated lawnmowers. So if you could add that to your list of things there, I like the automated lawnmower would be great. So,
well, you know, we have automated vacuums, right? The Roomba going around. I think it's a short leap to an automated lawnmower. I think.
Right. Well, thank you, Tom, and thanks again for your presentation. For y'all that had participated, thank you very much for your questions. Just share with y'all others that weren't able to join us, that this presentation will be provided on the Oak Cliff Chamber's website. And with that, again, thank you so much, Tom. Adrian or Lando, is there anything else we need to do to wrap up our meeting?
Yeah, I was going to jump in real quick, and this is Keandra, and I'd like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Thomas. And wanted to let everyone know about the Chamber's resource page. It's at oakcliffchamber.org/COVID-19/, which should be on your screens right now. And what this resource page does is meetings such as these will appear under video resources and webinars. So it'll be there if you'd like to take a look at it again or forward it to someone who missed it, as well as other resources. Resources for small businesses that may have been impacted by this COVID pandemic, or if you know someone that has lost their job or just needs any type of personal or business resources, we've decided to put them all in one spot. If you need help applying for funding or whatever, we have tried to make one place for everyone to get all of the resources that they need. And so again, that's oakcliffchamber.org/COVID-19/. And with that, thank you for everyone for attending our Transportation and Mobility Committee meeting. I hope you all have a wonderfully safe day.